They thought she didn't belong in a place like that, but they had no idea they had just turned away someone who could quietly rewrite their future. The boutique on Madison Avenue gleamed under warm chandelier light, its glass walls reflecting rows of pristine designer pieces that most people only saw in magazines. Each handbag displayed like a museum artifact, each silk dress hanging with deliberate precision, and the polished marble floors carried the soft echo of expensive heels and quiet confidence as customers moved through the space like they owned it. And then she walked in. She didn't announce herself, didn't draw attention, didn't carry the kind of presence that demanded immediate respect, but she stepped inside with calm purpose, wearing a simple cream cardigan, light denim jeans, and a pair of worn flats that had clearly seen more than a few city miles. Her hair loosely tied back, her expression composed, almost detached, as if the opulence around her didn't intimidate her, and more importantly, didn't impress her either. A sales associate near the entrance glanced up for half a second, her smile automatic at first, then fading just slightly as her eyes traveled from the woman's shoes to her cardigan, to the absence of anything that signaled wealth. No designer bag, no jewelry worth noticing, no visual cue that said she belonged among the boutique's usual clientele. And in that half-second pause, something shifted, subtle but unmistakable. A silent judgment made and filed away. The woman continued walking deeper into the boutique, her fingers lightly brushing the fabric of a navy dress as she passed, not with hesitation but with familiarity, as though she understood quality without needing to prove it. And she paused briefly at a display near the center, where a limited edition handbag sat under soft lighting, its price tag discreet but unmistakably steep, the kind of item that required not just money, but confidence to even ask about. She studied it quietly, her eyes steady, her posture relaxed, not performing for anyone, not trying to impress, just present. Behind the counter, two employees exchanged a quick glance, one of them leaning slightly closer to the other, whispering something that didn't quite reach across the room, but carried enough tone to be understood, and neither of them moved to assist her. Minutes passed. Other customers were greeted, offered champagne, guided through selections with attentive smiles, while she remained where she was, invisible in plain sight, her presence acknowledged only in passing glances that never turned into service. Still, she didn't call out, didn't raise her hand, didn't demand attention. She simply waited, patient in a way that didn't feel passive, but intentional. Finally, one of the associates approached, her smile polite but restrained, the kind of smile that existed more out of obligation than genuine hospitality. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone light, but carrying an edge of assumption, as if the question itself was already answered. The woman turned slightly, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Yes," she said softly, her voice calm, measured. "I'd like to see that bag." She gestured toward the display piece. The associate followed her gesture, then looked back at her, a flicker of something crossing her face, not quite annoyance, not quite disbelief, but something close. "That item is part of a private collection," she replied, her words carefully chosen, her tone subtly distancing. "It's typically reserved for our established clients." The words hung in the air longer than necessary. The woman's expression didn't change. Not embarrassment, not anger, just stillness. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'd still like to take a closer look." The associate hesitated for a fraction of a second, then offered a small, almost dismissive smile. "Of course," she said, though her body language didn't move to retrieve the item, not yet. Across the room, another customer laughed softly at something unrelated, but the sound carried, blending into the moment in a way that made the silence around them feel heavier. The boutique, for all its brightness, seemed to hold its breath, and somewhere beneath the polished surface, something invisible had already begun to fracture, though no one there realized it yet. Not the employees, not the watching customers, and certainly not the woman standing quietly in front of them, who had just asked a simple question in a place that had already decided she didn't belong. The associate's fingers rested lightly on the glass display case, but she did not move to unlock it, her hesitation stretching just long enough to make the moment uncomfortable, just long enough for anyone watching to understand that this was not standard service, that something unspoken had already decided how far this interaction would go. "It is a very exclusive piece," she added, her tone soft but edged with quiet certainty, as if offering a final chance for the woman to reconsider her request without needing to be refused outright. The woman nodded once, her gaze steady on the handbag, not on the associate. "I see that," she replied calmly. "That is why I am interested." The response lingered in the air, composed and direct, and for a brief second, the associate seemed unsure how to proceed. Behind them, the boutique continued its quiet rhythm, the soft murmur of conversation, the faint clink of a champagne glass being set down, the distant hum of the city outside filtering through the glass doors. But here, in this small pocket of space, the atmosphere had tightened, subtle tension threading through every second that passed. The associate finally exhaled a small, almost inaudible breath and straightened slightly, her posture shifting from polite neutrality to something more guarded. "May I ask," she said, her voice lowering just enough to sound discreet, though not quite enough to avoid being overheard, "if you have shopped with us before?" It was not a question meant to gather information. It was a question meant to confirm an assumption. The woman turned her head slightly, meeting the associate's eyes now, her expression unchanged. "Not at this location," she answered. Honest. Simple. And apparently, not the answer the associate wanted. A faint smile appeared on the associate's lips, but it did not reach her eyes. "I understand," she said, nodding slowly, as though something had just been verified. "Our boutique operates a little differently than most retail stores. We prioritize long-standing relationships with our clients, and certain items are reserved accordingly." There it was. Not a refusal, not yet, but a line drawn all the same. The woman let the silence settle between them, not rushing to fill it, not pushing back, simply allowing the words to exist exactly as they were intended. Around them, a couple near the fitting area had grown noticeably quieter, their attention drifting toward the exchange, curiosity pulling them in despite themselves. The associate shifted her weight slightly, perhaps aware of the growing attention, perhaps emboldened by it. "If you would like," she continued, her tone now carrying a faint suggestion, "I can show you some of our more accessible collections. We have beautiful options at a lower price point that might be more suitable." The words were delivered smoothly, professionally even, but the implication was unmistakable. The woman's fingers, which had been resting lightly on the edge of the display, lifted slowly, her hand falling back to her side with deliberate calm. She did not react immediately. She did not defend herself. She simply took in the moment, the assumption, the quiet dismissal wrapped in polished language. Then she gave a small nod, as if acknowledging something far deeper than the words themselves. "That will not be necessary," she said softly. The associate blinked, just once, caught off guard by the lack of resistance, by the absence of embarrassment, by the quiet certainty in the woman's voice. It was not defiance. It was not submission either. It was something else entirely. Something that did not fit the expectation that had been placed on her the moment she walked through the door. And for the first time since the interaction began, the associate hesitated again, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her expression before it disappeared just as quickly as it came. But the shift had already happened, subtle, almost invisible, like the first crack in glass before it shatters, and no one in the boutique, not even the woman herself, had yet revealed just how much that single moment was about to cost them. The associate's smile settled into something firmer now, less polite, more practiced, as if she had reached a quiet conclusion about how this interaction should end, and she straightened her posture slightly, drawing a subtle line between herself and the woman standing across from her. "Very well," she said, her tone cool but controlled, though there was a faint sharpness beneath it that had not been there before. "In that case, I would recommend visiting one of our partner stores downtown. They carry a wider range of entry-level items." The pause before those last two words was small, but deliberate, and it landed exactly as intended. A soft murmur rippled somewhere behind them, quickly hushed, but not unnoticed, as if the boutique itself was reacting in quiet agreement. The woman did not turn toward the sound. She remained exactly where she was, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady, her gaze still calm in a way that felt almost out of place in a room where tension was beginning to gather. "I am not looking for entry-level," she replied, her voice even, neither raised nor lowered, simply stated. The associate's expression tightened for just a fraction of a second before she recovered, her lips pressing into a polite line. "Of course," she said, though the word carried no agreement, only dismissal. She glanced briefly toward the front of the store, where another employee had paused mid-step, clearly watching now, along with a couple near the accessories wall who were no longer pretending not to listen. The attention in the room had shifted fully, drawn into this exchange like a quiet current. The associate leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice again, though not enough to remove the audience. "We do have certain standards here," she continued, her tone now edged with authority, as if she were explaining a policy that should have been obvious. "Appointments are typically required for high-value pieces, and our clients usually arrange those in advance." Another pause. Another look, this time more direct, more pointed. "It helps us ensure that everyone receives the level of service they expect." The implication was no longer subtle. The woman's eyes held hers for a moment longer this time, not in challenge, but in quiet recognition, as though she understood exactly what was being said beneath the words, and perhaps had understood it from the very beginning. Around them, the boutique had grown noticeably quieter, conversations fading into low whispers, movements slowing, the soft music overhead continuing as if nothing had changed, even as everything in the room had shifted. The woman drew a small breath, not out of frustration, but as if marking a decision. Then she nodded once, a simple, almost gentle motion. "I see," she said, and there was something in the way she said it, something final, something that did not ask for clarification or permission. The associate seemed to relax slightly, interpreting the response as acceptance, as retreat, as confirmation that the situation was resolving itself without further effort. "If you would like to return another time with an appointment," she added, her voice smoothing out again, "we would be happy to assist you then." The woman did not respond immediately. Her gaze shifted briefly across the boutique, taking in the displays, the lighting, the carefully curated atmosphere that had just moments ago been offered to everyone except her, and there was no resentment in her expression, no visible hurt, just a quiet awareness that settled deeper than anything spoken aloud. Then she looked back at the associate, and for the first time, there was the faintest hint of something else in her eyes, not anger, not sadness, but certainty. "No," she said softly, "that will not be necessary." The words were simple, but they landed differently this time, carrying a weight the associate did not quite understand. For a brief second, confusion flickered across her face, as if she had expected gratitude, or at least compliance, but not this quiet refusal. The woman turned then, her movement unhurried, her steps measured against the marble floor as she began to walk toward the exit, leaving behind the display, the conversation, and the unspoken judgment that had filled the space. No one stopped her. No one called after her. The door opened with a soft chime as she stepped out onto the street, the city air rushing in for a moment before the glass closed again, sealing the boutique back into its polished silence. And inside, the employees exchanged brief looks, small shrugs, subtle smirks returning as the tension dissolved, as if nothing of consequence had just occurred. But something had. Something quiet, something irreversible, something that had already begun to unfold beyond the glass doors, far from the reach of their assumptions. Outside, the city moved as it always did, indifferent and fast, taxis sliding past in streaks of yellow, footsteps blending into the rhythm of Manhattan's afternoon, and she stepped onto the sidewalk without hesitation, the boutique door closing softly behind her, as if nothing significant had just happened, as if the quiet dismissal she had experienced inside was just another forgettable moment in a busy day. But it was not. She walked a few steps away from the entrance, then paused near the edge of the curb, her gaze lifting briefly toward the reflection in the boutique's glass, where her simple silhouette stood framed against a world that had just refused to see her, and for a moment, the noise of the street seemed to fade, replaced by a stillness that lived entirely within her. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, not with urgency, not with frustration, but with the same calm precision that had defined her every movement inside, and she tapped the screen once, then again, her expression unchanged as the call connected. "Hello," she said quietly, her voice steady, almost gentle. There was a brief pause, the faint sound of traffic humming in the background. Then a voice responded on the other end, low, attentive, immediately focused. She listened for a second, then spoke again, her words simple, direct. "I stopped by the boutique on Madison," she said. "The one you mentioned last week." Another pause, slightly longer this time, as if the person on the other end was already sensing the shift beneath her tone, the absence of excitement where there should have been some. She glanced back once more at the boutique, her eyes resting on the glass doors, the polished handles, the carefully curated image of exclusivity that had just turned her away without ever asking who she was. "No," she continued softly. "I did not stay." Silence answered her for a moment, but it was not empty silence. It was the kind that carried weight, that gathered meaning even without words. And when the voice on the other end spoke again, it was different now, sharper, more focused, as though something had just aligned. She listened without interrupting, her expression calm, her posture relaxed, one hand resting lightly at her side while the other held the phone close. "That will not be necessary," she said after a moment, echoing the same quiet certainty she had shown inside, though this time, the words carried a different kind of finality. Another pause, a longer one. She exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, then gave a small nod, even though the person she was speaking to could not see it. "All right," she said. "I will be nearby." She ended the call with a soft tap, lowering the phone back into her bag, and for a brief second, she simply stood there, the city flowing around her, people passing without noticing, without knowing, without understanding what had just begun to unfold. Then she stepped forward again, moving away from the boutique, her pace unhurried, her presence quiet, blending once more into the crowd as if she had never been singled out, never been dismissed, never been underestimated. Back inside, the boutique had returned to its rhythm, the employees resuming their roles, their voices light, their movements practiced, the earlier tension dissolving into casual conversation as if it had never truly existed. The associate who had spoken to her adjusted a display near the front, smoothing the edge of a silk scarf, her expression composed, a faint trace of satisfaction lingering beneath the surface, as though she had handled the situation exactly as expected. "Some people just do not understand how places like this work," she murmured to a colleague nearby, her tone low but confident. The colleague gave a small nod, glancing briefly toward the door before returning to her task. "It happens," she replied. At least she left without making a scene. They shared a brief look, a quiet agreement passing between them, and then the moment was gone, folded neatly into the day like everything else. None of them noticed the subtle shift outside, the way a sleek black SUV slowed as it turned onto the street, its glossy surface catching the afternoon light, its presence deliberate without being loud, the kind of arrival that did not need to announce itself to be felt. It did not stop immediately. It passed once, then continued down the block, as if confirming something, as if timing its return with quiet precision. And inside the boutique, beneath the chandeliers and polished calm, no one yet realized that the moment they had dismissed so easily had already set something far larger into motion, something that would return not with noise or anger, but with a quiet force they would not be able to ignore. An hour can pass quietly in a place like that, measured not in seconds but in transactions, in the soft rustle of tissue paper, in the muted chime of credit card approvals, and inside the boutique, time moved forward without interruption, or at least that is what they believed. The associate who had dismissed her now stood behind the counter, wrapping a purchase for a well-dressed customer, her hands precise, her smile effortless, the earlier moment already filed away as insignificant, as something that did not deserve a second thought. Around her, the boutique maintained its polished rhythm, sunlight shifting slightly through the glass, casting longer reflections across the marble floor, the soft music continuing its gentle loop overhead. A new group of customers had entered, laughter drifting lightly through the space, blending into the curated atmosphere of comfort and exclusivity. And then, outside, something changed. It began not with a sound, but with a presence, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, as a black SUV rolled slowly into view at the far end of the street, its movement smooth, deliberate, the kind of vehicle that did not rush because it never needed to. Its glossy surface reflected the city in distorted fragments, skyscrapers bending along its frame, sunlight catching along its edges like a quiet signal. It approached the boutique with measured precision, slowing as it neared the entrance, then coming to a complete stop directly in front of the glass doors. Inside, one of the junior associates glanced up, her attention drawn not by noise, but by instinct, something about the arrival registering before her mind fully processed it. Her eyes lingered for a second longer than necessary. Then another employee followed her gaze. And then another. The shift was subtle, like a ripple spreading across still water, one glance turning into two into several, until the quiet focus of the boutique tilted ever so slightly toward the entrance. The associate behind the counter noticed at last, her attention pulled reluctantly from her task as the room's energy shifted around her. She looked up, her expression neutral at first, then tightening just slightly as she followed the direction of everyone else's gaze. Through the glass, the SUV sat motionless, its presence somehow filling more space than it physically occupied, its tinted windows concealing whoever was inside. For a brief moment, nothing happened. The boutique seemed to hold its breath, conversations softening, movements slowing, the faint hum of the city pressing gently against the glass, as if waiting. Then the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, tall, composed, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit with effortless precision, the kind of detail that spoke not of fashion, but of certainty. His movements were unhurried, controlled, each step deliberate as he closed the door behind him with a quiet, solid click that seemed to carry further than it should have. He adjusted his cuff once, a small, almost habitual motion, then lifted his gaze toward the boutique entrance. Inside, the air shifted again, this time more noticeably. One of the employees near the front straightened instinctively. Another smoothed her hair without realizing it. The associate behind the counter felt something tighten in her chest, a faint, unexplainable tension that did not come from recognition, not yet, but from something deeper, something intuitive. The man walked toward the door, his reflection stretching across the glass before him, his presence growing clearer with every step, and as he reached for the handle, the boutique seemed to fall into a quiet, suspended moment, the kind where everything pauses just before something irreversible happens. The door opened with a soft chime, the same gentle sound that had marked the woman's departure an hour earlier, but this time, it carried a different weight, a different meaning. He stepped inside, bringing with him a silence that did not ask for attention, but commanded it anyway, and for the first time that day, the boutique felt something it was not designed to handle, not discomfort, not confusion, but the unmistakable arrival of consequence. The door closed softly behind him, but the silence he carried did not leave with the sound. It settled deeper into the room, pressing gently against every conversation until voices lowered and movements slowed, and for a brief moment, no one quite knew why they had stopped what they were doing, only that they had. He did not look around immediately, did not scan the displays or acknowledge the attention that had quietly gathered around him. Instead, he took a few measured steps forward, his shoes barely making a sound against the marble floor, his posture relaxed yet unmistakably controlled, the kind of presence that did not demand recognition but assumed it would come. The associate near the entrance recovered first, stepping forward with a practiced smile that returned almost automatically, though there was a slight stiffness in it now, a hesitation that had not been there before. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, her tone polished, respectful, carefully attentive. "Welcome. How may we assist you today?" He paused just inside the boutique, his gaze finally lifting, moving across the space not in curiosity, but in quiet assessment, as if he were already familiar with everything he saw, as if this place, with all its curated elegance, held no mystery to him. His eyes passed over the displays, the customers, the employees, and then settled, briefly, on the associate who had spoken to him earlier, the one who had dismissed the woman without ever asking her name. She felt it immediately, that brief moment of eye contact, and something in her posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, her shoulders straightening, her breath catching just slightly, though she could not have said why. "I am looking for someone," he said, his voice calm, even, carrying easily through the quiet space without needing to be raised. The associate at the entrance nodded quickly, eager now, attentive in a way that bordered on urgent. "Of course, sir," she replied. "May I ask who?" A small pause followed, not long, but deliberate, as if he were giving the question exactly the weight it deserved. "My wife," he said simply. The words settled into the room with quiet clarity, and for a moment, it seemed to ripple outward, touching every corner of the boutique, every employee, every customer who had been drawn into the unfolding scene. The associate's smile flickered just slightly. "I see," she said, though something in her tone suggested she did not yet. "And is she here with you today?" He shook his head once, slow, precise. "She was," he replied. The past tense landed with subtle force, and the air shifted again, the meaning beginning to take shape even before it was fully understood. Behind the counter, the associate who had spoken to the woman earlier felt a faint chill run through her. Something instinctive, something that did not come from logic but from recognition, as if a piece of a puzzle she had not realized she was part of had just clicked into place. He took another step forward, his gaze moving again, this time more focused, more intentional, as though he were retracing something unseen. "About an hour ago," he added, his tone unchanged, still calm, still measured, but now carrying a quiet edge that had not been there before. No one spoke immediately. The boutique, once filled with soft conversation and curated ease, had fallen into a deeper silence, the kind that does not come from emptiness, but from attention, from the slow realization that something important is happening and no one wants to miss it. The associate near the entrance hesitated, her confidence wavering for the first time. I am not sure I recall," she began, though her voice lacked the certainty it had just moments ago. And then, from behind the counter, the other associate stepped forward, her expression carefully composed, though the color in her face had shifted ever so slightly. "Sir," she said, her voice controlled, but tighter now. "Perhaps if you could describe her, we could assist you more effectively." He turned toward her then, fully this time, his gaze steady, unwavering, and for a brief second, the room seemed to narrow around that moment, around that exchange. "Simple," he said. "Quiet." Another pause. "And apparently," he added, his voice dropping just enough to sharpen the words, "not someone you believed belonged here." The room went completely still. The words did not echo, but they did not need to. They settled into the space with a quiet finality that pressed against every person in the room. And for a moment, no one moved, no one spoke, as if the entire boutique had been caught mid-breath. The associate behind the counter felt it first, that unmistakable shift from control to exposure, her carefully composed expression holding just a second too long before it faltered, not visibly enough for a casual observer, but enough for those paying attention, enough for him. "Sir, I believe there may be some misunderstanding," she said, her voice steady on the surface, though something underneath had begun to tighten, a thread of uncertainty she could not fully conceal. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he let the silence stretch, his gaze remaining fixed on her, not hostile, not raised, but unwavering, the kind of look that did not accuse loudly, but did not allow escape either. "Is there?" he asked quietly. The question was simple, but it carried weight, not demanding an answer, but expecting one. The associate opened her mouth slightly, then closed it again, her mind searching for something to hold on to, a version of events that could still be controlled, still be shaped into something acceptable. Around them, the customers who had once been browsing now stood still, their attention fully captured, the earlier ease replaced by a quiet curiosity that had sharpened into something more focused, more aware. One of the junior employees shifted her weight nervously near the entrance, her eyes moving between the man and her colleague, sensing that whatever was unfolding had already moved beyond routine interaction. "We treat all of our guests with the utmost respect," the associate continued, her tone more formal now, more deliberate, as if repeating a principle could restore it. "If your wife felt otherwise, that was certainly not our intention." The words were polished, practiced, designed to resolve without admitting fault. He listened without interruption, his expression unchanged, his posture still. Then he took a slow step closer, not aggressive, not hurried, just enough to close the distance between them, enough to make the conversation no longer feel abstract. "Intention," he repeated softly, as if considering the word itself. Another pause followed, heavier this time. "That is interesting," he said. The associate's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the counter, though she kept her composure, her chin lifting just a fraction as if bracing. Because what she described did not sound like uncertainty. He continued, his voice calm, measured, but now carrying a quiet clarity that left little room for interpretation. It sounded very certain. The room seemed to narrow further, the space between each person shrinking under the weight of what was being said without being raised. One of the customers near the display case glanced down briefly, then back up, as if unsure whether to look away or witness the moment fully. The associate's breath caught almost imperceptibly, her confidence slipping another fraction as the situation moved beyond her control. If there was any miscommunication, she began again, though her voice lacked the earlier firmness. We would be more than happy to. She did not misunderstand you, he said, gently cutting through her words without raising his tone, without needing to. The interruption was not loud, but it was absolute. Silence followed immediately, deeper than before, the kind that does not invite continuation. He held her gaze for another second, then another, long enough for the truth of the moment to settle, long enough for every person in the boutique to feel it. She rarely does, he added quietly. That was when the shift became undeniable, not just in the associate, but in the room itself, the earlier assumptions dissolving, replaced by something heavier, something closer to realization. The junior employee near the entrance straightened instinctively, her expression now more alert, more cautious. A customer slowly set down a handbag she had been holding, no longer focused on the item, her attention fixed entirely on the exchange. And behind it all, the boutique, with its polished surfaces and curated calm, seemed to lose just a fraction of its certainty, as if the foundation it had quietly relied on had begun to crack, not with noise, but with the quiet force of being seen clearly for the first time. The silence did not break, it deepened, settling into something heavier than discomfort, something closer to realization, and for the first time since he had entered, no one in the boutique seemed certain of their place within it. The associate behind the counter felt it most sharply, the slow unraveling of the confidence she had worn so easily just an hour earlier, her fingers now resting still against the polished surface, no longer moving, no longer performing, as if even the smallest gesture might draw attention she could not control. Sir, she said again, though her voice had softened, the edge replaced by something more cautious, more aware. We would like to make this right. The words came carefully now, no longer polished from routine, but shaped in response to pressure, to the quiet force standing in front of her. He studied her for a moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with a calm that felt more decisive than either. Would you? He asked, his tone even, though the question carried a quiet weight that lingered longer than the words themselves. She nodded quickly, almost instinctively. Of course, she replied. If your wife would like to return, we would be more than happy to provide her with a private appointment, full access to our collection, anything she needs. The offer was immediate, generous, carefully constructed, but something about it arrived too late, as if it belonged to a moment that had already passed. He did not respond right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim leather card holder, opening it with a small, precise motion, then placing a single card on the counter between them. The sound it made was soft, almost insignificant, but in the silence of the room, it carried. The associate's eyes dropped to it, her gaze focusing on the embossed lettering, the clean lines, the understated design that spoke of something far beyond what it displayed at first glance. She read the name once, then again, and in that second reading, something changed. The color in her face shifted, not dramatically, but enough, her breath catching just slightly as recognition settled in, not slowly, but all at once, like a realization she wished had come sooner. Her posture straightened instinctively, though this time it was not out of confidence, but out of awareness, as if she had just stepped into a role she had not prepared for. I did not realize, she began, her voice quieter now, the certainty gone. He closed the card holder and slipped it back into his pocket without looking away from her. That seems to be the pattern, he said calmly. The words were not sharp, not raised, but they landed with unmistakable clarity, cutting through any attempt to recover what had already been lost. Around them, the employees who had been watching now exchanged quick, subtle glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something closer to concern, each of them understanding, in their own way, that the situation had moved beyond a simple misunderstanding. One of the junior associates lowered her gaze entirely, suddenly focused on a task that no longer required attention, while another stood still, her earlier confidence replaced by a quiet tension she could not hide. The customer near the display case took a small step back, creating space, as if instinctively recognizing that the room no longer belonged to casual observation. The associate behind the counter swallowed lightly, her hands now clasped together in front of her, no longer resting on the counter, no longer in control of the space she had occupied so easily before. "We would like the opportunity to correct this," she said, her voice steady but subdued, every word measured now. Careful not to overstep, careful not to assume. He regarded her for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, as if recognizing the effort while also understanding its limits. "You already had that opportunity," he replied. Another pause followed, heavier than the last, the weight of the statement settling across the room, leaving no space for interpretation. And in that moment, the boutique, with all its polished surfaces and curated exclusivity, felt something it had not anticipated, not anger, not confrontation, but the quiet, undeniable presence of consequence, unfolding not with noise, but with a calm that made it impossible to ignore. For a long moment, no one spoke, no one moved, as if the entire boutique had been quietly stripped of its certainty, leaving behind only the fragile awareness of what had just been revealed. The associate stood there, her composure no longer something she controlled, but something she tried to hold together, her earlier confidence replaced by a careful stillness, as though any movement might deepen what had already been exposed. He did not raise his voice, did not linger for dramatic effect. He simply let the truth remain where it had landed, unembellished, undeniable. Then, without another word, he turned. The motion was smooth, unhurried, as if the conversation had reached its natural end, as if there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to prove. His shoes moved softly against the marble as he walked toward the entrance, each step measured, deliberate, carrying with it a quiet finality that filled the space more than any confrontation could have. The employees watched him go, their eyes following not out of curiosity now, but out of something closer to understanding, each of them aware, in their own way, that the moment they had dismissed earlier had returned in a form they could not undo. The door opened again with that same soft chime, and as he stepped outside, the light shifted slightly, the reflection of the street blending briefly with the polished interior before the glass settled back into place. Outside, she was waiting, not directly in front of the boutique, not in a way that drew attention, but a few steps down the sidewalk, standing near the edge of the curb where the city continued to move without pause, her posture calm, her expression unchanged, as if the hour that had passed had not unsettled her at all. She looked up as he approached, and for the first time in the story, there was the faintest trace of warmth in her eyes, not relief, not vindication, just recognition. He slowed slightly as he reached her, his presence softening in a way that had not been visible inside, the tension of the moment dissolving into something quieter, more personal. "You did not need to come," she said gently, her voice steady, the same calm that had carried her through everything before. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "I did," he replied simply. She studied him for a second, then glanced briefly back toward the boutique, her gaze resting on the glass doors that had once closed behind her, the place that had measured her without knowing her, and then she looked away again, as if the moment no longer held any weight. "It is all right," she said softly. And the way she said it was not dismissal, not denial, but acceptance, the kind that did not come from weakness, but from knowing exactly who she was, regardless of who recognized it. He nodded once, understanding without needing more explanation, and together, they turned toward the waiting SUV, its presence quiet but unmistakable, the driver already stepping out to open the door. As they approached, the city continued around them, unchanged, unaware, but inside the boutique, something had shifted permanently. The associate remained behind the counter, her hands still, her gaze distant now, no longer focused on the displays or the customers, but on the space where the man had stood, on the realization that had come too late to change anything. Around her, the boutique slowly returned to movement, conversations resuming, transactions continuing, but the atmosphere had altered in a way that could not be fully restored, a subtle fracture beneath the polished surface. And as the SUV pulled away from the curb, merging back into the flow of the city, the reflection of the boutique faded along its glossy exterior, leaving behind a lesson that no display, no policy, no carefully chosen word could hide. Because in the end, respect was never about who you recognized, but how you treated those you did not.